Hello, friends. I'm Tonya, and welcome to the Sensitivity Rising podcast.
And hello, I'm Daphne, and today's episode is going to be all about boundaries. So, we'll be talking about what a boundary is, the main reasons why we don't set healthy boundaries, especially as highly sensitive people. We'll also talk about how to say no to things that we don't want to do. And Tanya and I will share some practical tips on how to set healthy boundaries in different areas of our life.
Yes, let's get into this. But first, if you're a fan of the show, please don't forget to share the podcast with friends and subscribe where you listen, and subscribe and like on YouTube if that's where you're spending time with us. And now, Daphne, let's talk about boundaries. This is such a great topic, especially for the time of year when we're recording this and when it's first airing, because we are right in the middle of the holiday season.
Yes, indeed.
And when it comes to caring for ourselves as highly sensitive people, it's really important for us to have very clear boundaries, but it's also an area that many of us as HSPs say that we struggle with it because we don't want to disappoint others, and a lot of times we fear rejection and kind of pushback from setting those boundaries.
Yeah. I know that a phrase that I hear a lot is, I need to set better boundaries. And so, I think it's useful to think about, what does that actually mean, though, when we say that? Because when we think about the word boundary, it often brings to mind something that separates two things, like, the edge of a country or the border between states, that those are boundaries. But in this kind of context, if we think about it in terms of people, boundaries are really important because they help us define ourselves, and they help us create our own sense of identity. Another thing is that they can help protect us from people or from situations that may threaten either our well-being or even our safety. And so we should never feel guilty about setting boundaries,
Nope.
and it's a really good thing to learn how to do. So, and my belly is growling. So a boundary, I don't know. I ate breakfast. A boundary is a limit that we set for ourselves in relation to other people, right? And so we all have our own personal space, and it's important for us to understand when our boundaries are being crossed. But it can be, a physical boundary, it can be a mental boundary or an emotional boundary that we have. But boundaries are what help us feel safe and secure. So setting them isn't selfish. It's more like, if anything, it's self-preservation. So learning to set healthy boundaries, it really comes down to understanding what each of us can kind of handle or not handle at any given time. That's another way of thinking about it. Um, it doesn't mean that we have to say no to everything, but rather it means that we want to say yes only when you feel ready and when you feel comfortable saying yes to things.
For sure. And personal boundaries really are just right, the limits and the rules that we set for ourselves in our relation to other people in our lives, and also to the world around us as well. And I think it's really important to for us to realize that the world we experience is the one that we create for ourselves ultimately,
Yeah.
moment after moment. And that in reality, even though sometimes it's really hard to kind of accept and wrap our heads around this, that no one can make us happy and no one can make us unhappy either. And that power really only belongs to us. And if it's only us that's creating this world that we're experiencing, then it's only us who have the ability to take ourselves from feeling stressed to feeling calm, from
Mm.
feeling kind of annoyed during the holidays to feeling happy and so on. And, one of the best ways for me, I found to embrace this self responsibility really for my emotions and feelings is to set those boundaries for myself. And when we can set healthy boundaries, we can say no to others when we want to, but also that we're comfortable opening ourselves up, right? To be more vulnerable and to have intimacy and close relationships.
Absolutely. If we think about it, a person who, and we maybe you've met someone like this, but a person who really keeps others and the world at a distance, whether that is emotionally, physically, or otherwise, then they would have really rigid boundaries. And then the flip side of it is someone who tends to get maybe a little too involved with others, or maybe, says too much too quickly, or things like that, where they really have difficulty saying no. They would have really porous boundaries. And so I think, our goal is to find healthy and flexible boundaries that are right for us at, where we are in our life right now, and knowing that changes. It changes from situation to situation and with different people. And I think that's such an important point that you made, that it's up to us to regulate our own emotions and well-being, and not expect others to do that, or to know how to do that for us. And boundaries are such an important part of that. And boundaries aren't a solid wall, right? They're always changing depending on our environment, depending on how we're feeling at that point in our life. Like right now, I know for myself, I have some extra stressors that are going on. And as a result, I'm being more, a little bit more rigid about my boundaries, but in a good way, and because I need that right now, because I need to protect myself a little bit more so that I am able to take responsibility for my emotional well-being. And when we so to establish clear boundaries, it's really important for us to stay connected with ourselves, with our own feelings, and with our own needs, which means that we have to keep developing our own awareness of ourselves, and checking in to see, what do I really need right now? And that way we can recognize that sort of felt sense of if our boundaries are being violated, or if we need to set firmer or clearer boundaries. And again, there's no set rules for how we do this, because every situation is unique. Our relationships with different people are unique, and what feels okay for us right now or with one person may be very different for someone else or in a different situation.
That's so true. And I feel like part of that navigation of boundaries is finding ways to make sure that you're communicating, right? That just because this is not what you need, if you're speaking to someone else, just because, let's say you're talking to your mom, and you struggle with boundaries around that, telling, your mother that just because these aren't your boundaries, these are my boundaries, right? And as highly sensitive people, we really have a tendency to neglect our needs, or to think that maybe they're not as important as taking care of someone else or putting someone else first. And we can also isolate ourselves, right? I know that me personally, I did this for years, and I've heard countless other HSPs say that they struggle with this as well, right? That sometimes they feel it's just so much easier to withdraw from relationships, from life, from experiences, just because it's too hard to manage kind of all of the feelings and emotions that can be so overwhelming for us as sensitive people. And then, we also have the tendency to take on the pain or the emotions of others as well. We want to maybe, fix other people, which
Yeah.
can be, a huge thing, or take on too much at once because we believe that we need to handle everything on our own. Um, does any of this sound familiar to you, Daphne?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think a lot of, like I said earlier, even that a lot of people will say, I need to get better at setting boundaries. And a lot of times, sometimes it's not even so much about setting a clear boundary as it is that we might be overcommitting ourselves or overscheduling or taking on more than we want to because we feel like we should, or because we feel like we need to be taking care of everyone else around us because we're so in tune with how they're feeling. And sometimes it's easier for us to focus on other people and how they're feeling than it is to shine that light on ourselves and to really allow ourselves to feel what we're feeling and to ask what we need. So, setting boundaries is such a necessary part of our own self-care because it can help keep our stress levels down. Because again, that means that we are only taking on tasks that aren't going to overwhelm us. And boundaries can really help us prevent becoming burnt out. Um, and and it's because they protect our own sense of self, that we are connected to ourselves. We tune in, we notice where we are, again, on all the levels. How are we doing physically right now? How are we doing emotionally and mentally? Do we need to cut ourselves a little more slack and give ourselves some more space and time? And ideally, we want to learn how to be assertive without the need for becoming aggressive when we're setting boundaries. Like in an ideal world,
Mhm.
people who are assertive, they have a stronger sense of self and they can say no to others with confidence and even in a positive way. It doesn't have to become negative and harsh and aggressive. And when we can be assertive in that confident way, we also tend to be better about asking for help when we need it, being able to stand up for yourself in the face of conflicts or injustice that comes up. And I know for myself that I have really struggled at times to set what I would consider healthy boundaries, partially because I didn't grow up with great examples of what that's like. And as a result of that, I at times default towards becoming aggressive, especially with the people around me. And that happens because I needed to set a boundary, or I needed to say no or ask for what I need, but I didn't know how to, or I kept putting everybody else's needs first until I finally just snap.
Mhm.
And I often, find that I feel like I need to make excuses for myself, if I want to say no, or if I need to ask for help. And again, I'll end up just snapping at people, that I love, because it's so hard at times to say no. Has that happened to you? Is that an issue that you understand, Tonya?
Definitely, not so much the snapping, but instead I would kind of go the opposite, where I used to completely withdraw and just get
Yeah.
like completely shut down instead.
Yeah.
And I had kind of I think in a lot of ways we grew up um in a lot of similar ways. And I learned everything I learned was through the lens of traumatized adults who didn't know how to manage their emotions. They didn't know how to self-regulate, and they never took personal responsibility for their actions. So
Mhm.
boundaries were not a thing at all. It was pretty much like a chaotic free-for-all, honestly. And so a lot of times if we're not if we're not taught healthy boundaries, right, it can be really hard to kind of start to navigate all of that, on your own. And but when you do start to set these kind of normal boundaries with people, who respect you, who want to be in your life, it's a great practice that, when it comes from a place of love, it really is an act of kindness towards ourselves. And if we're coming from a place of, when we're trying to set boundaries, if we're coming from a place of resentment or frustration or anger because we've let it kind of build up and build up, right? We might not get the results that we're looking for when we finally try to set those boundaries. So, we might want to ask ourselves, how can I come from a place of love and make my boundary from that place? And, like I said, it's best, it's to try to not let ourselves kind of reach that point, that kind of boiling point sometimes of frustration, in the first place, by setting those boundaries, earlier rather than later. Because I feel like the longer we wait, then the harder it gets, right?
Such a great point. And that's true whether we have the tendency to kind of lean towards becoming irritated or to lean towards total retreat, where we isolate and shut everybody out. Because both ways, it doesn't usually get us the result that we're looking for. And I love that idea of asking ourselves, like, how can I set it from a place of love? And that takes great awareness, because it means that we're really checking in with ourselves and we're acknowledging, yeah, I have this need right now. And instead of feeling like I have to make excuses for it, I can, really do this in a loving way, recognizing that I'll show up better in my relationships with these other people that I love and care for if I do set that boundary for myself. And another way that we can think about boundaries is that it can include two very specific parts. So the first part would be a request that you make of someone to change a certain behavior if something that they're doing feels like it's crossing a boundary for you. And then the second part is the consequence of what you will do to protect yourself if they violate the boundary. And so if we look at it this way, a boundary is basically saying no or making a request like, please don't do this, and following up with the action that you'll take if they don't. And the really important thing to remember here is, just like you said earlier, of we have to take responsibility for our own emotions and all of that, is that we can only control what we are going to do, right? So we can ask other people to do something or not do something, but then they're going to make their own decision about what they're going to do or not do. And that's true whether we're talking to our kids or our partners or our parents or our friends. We can make the request and we can say, if you don't honor this request, this is going to be the consequence. But it's up to us to decide how we're going to respond to their action if it isn't what we're hoping for, because we can't control them. We can only control ourselves.
Yeah. So, right. So it's basically telling them that, what you will do if they continue to do these behaviors or these actions that you ask them to change in order for you to have a healthy relationship or a healthy boundary, right? So for example, I use the example of a parent before, but let's say that you told your best friend a secret, right? And we've all been in this situation, even if we were 12, 12 or 60, you tell your best friend a secret and then, they tell someone else, and it's it's a boundary, right? If you say, you know, hey, the next time I tell you something in confidence and you tell someone else, I'm not going to tell you these things anymore that are, you know, that are private and important to me. And it's basically saying, you know, if you do this, then I'm going to do that. And in this way, you know, boundaries can really help us to clarify for other people, you know, what's acceptable to us and what isn't. And, you know, we a lot of times expect other people to kind of know, right? Without us maybe even telling them, especially I think this happens a lot with partners.
Yeah.
We kind of expect them to already know what our boundaries are, or even, you know, what our wants and needs are, what's acceptable, what's not. But we can't really honestly expect them to know all of those things if we can't communicate to them clearly. And I feel like if it's someone that, you know, really likes you or loves you or, you know, respects you, it might be really hard for them to maybe kind of adjust to. But if there's somebody who belongs in your life, then you'll be able to find that, you'll be able to find that space with them eventually. It might take a little bit of extra work and patience on both of your parts, but I think that, yeah, I think if that person is meant to be in your life, then you can establish these boundaries with them.
Yeah. And it's so important because, you know, most of us at some point or another have found ourselves in a relationship in our life where we did try to set a boundary, or we found something that really wasn't working for us because, you know, whether it was something that felt really hurtful to us or whatever. And if we either don't communicate very clearly, like it is, you know, not okay with me for you to do this. and
Mhm.
and if it continues, then I will whatever that is, you know,
Mhm.
but if you make a boundary request and you don't follow through with what you've said you will do, then you're essentially only making idle threats. And that diminishes oftentimes our respect for ourselves, and our confidence can start to plummet, and it will often diminish the respect that that person has for you. You know, if you're in a relationship and someone does something and you say, hey, if this happens again, I'm leaving and I will not tolerate this, and
Mhm.
then it happens again and you stay, then it's going to affect everyone's respect, you know.
Almost like crying wolf, sort
It
of.
is, it
Yeah.
is. And I think, you know, especially, you know, if people, if when they've ended up in, you know, abusive relationships, and, you know, even if they're emotionally abusive relationships and stuff, that kind of thing can start to happen where we say, and this can happen in friendships. It's not always just love partnerships. It
Yeah,
happens in
absolutely.
families. And
Families.
this is where it's so important to have those boundaries, but where we really have to take responsibility for ourselves, because we cannot control what they choose to do. And if they choose to overstep that boundary and we've identified that it's important to us, then it then becomes our responsibility to follow through so that it doesn't just become murky for everyone. And this can happen with our kids as well. You know, if we're like, they're doing something and you say, hey, if you don't, you know, get off your phone by such and such time, I'm taking it from you. And then when the time comes, you don't follow through, then it is not a clear boundary. And it, people, then it's like just creates confusion. And it's actually like really helps our relationships when we can set them clearly. So why do you think, you know, why is this so hard to do? Why do we have such a difficult time with keeping our end of the bargain at, you know, and when we set a boundary or try to set a boundary? What do
Yeah,
you
I
think?
mean, I want to say I totally agree with you that it's vital that we have to mean what we say, and we really need to stick with those things those consequences, right? To someone's actions. It's just because without that, to me, that's the foundation of it, really. And I think a lot of times, especially as, sensitive people, it can come down to us being afraid of what other people think. And that's just not sensitive people, right? That's everybody. Everybody deals with that kind of stuff. For a lot of us, especially too, if we maybe have a, a background of trauma, it can be a fear of being left, right?
Yeah.
Being left by a partner, being dismissed or ignored by someone that we value or care about. And it's really the same reason why we people please too, right? And we say yes to things that we don't want to do. We think that if we say no, or if we set these boundaries, that we're going to somehow hurt another person, or we're going to harm or lose that relationship. But what we're actually really doing when we're letting people step over our boundaries is that we're preventing a real authentic relationship and a real connection of intimacy with that person. And having those conversations about boundaries are definitely uncomfortable, right? They're definitely challenging. They're not fun.
Yeah.
They're not fun. They're scary, right? Let's just, they're scary.
Yeah.
But what is the cost of not having those conversations, right? It's us living with resentment. It's us being dishonest by making those idle threats, even though we don't intend to make them false threats. I'm sure we probably really mean it in the moment.
Yeah.
And we kind of back away from it a lot of times, right? And not speaking our truth is just way worse. It's way worse for us, for our mental, physical, spiritual health. It's worse for the relationships that we're trying to nurture, right? And it's really not worth it at the end of the day, because we need to be prepared to be uncomfortable, right? In so many different aspects of our lives, but this is one of the top ones, I think. And, so be uncomfortable in those few seconds when we say no and we set that boundary for the results that we want to have of having these relationships based on honesty and integrity with ourselves and with the people that we care about in our lives.
That's so true, Tonya. It's uncomfortable, but it's worse when we start to lose respect for ourselves, or other people start to lose respect for us, or we're walking around resentful because we're too afraid. And like you said, that like we might really mean it. We might not be making idle threats for the purpose of making idle threats, but then the fear comes up. And even with our own kids, like if we've tried to set a boundary with them and then they overstep that, and then it's time to follow through with the consequences, some people struggle with that, because then there's the fear of what if they lash out, or in the moment, it would just be so much easier to smooth everything over and just let them do what they want to do. But that's not good.
Yeah.
So I think another reason why that all of this is difficult, and whether that's saying no, people pleasing, is because we are hardwired for connection. And we really, we are tribal creatures. We're tribal animals and beings. And it can make us feel like we're going to die if we're rejected, if we're criticized, or we feel humiliated by something. If we try to set a boundary and someone is totally disrespectful and dismisses us, then that's kind of humiliating, because we feel like we're not important. And if you think about it, in our not so distant past, as humans, if we were kicked out of the tribe, it could mean certain death, because we wouldn't have been able to fend for ourselves. We wouldn't have been able to get enough food for ourselves or protect ourselves from wild animals without having the safety of the tribe. And it is literally programmed into our DNA to have that connection and to be accepted, which can make it much easier to try to please the people around us. It is literally how our brain is wired. And so we should understand that it is our default to want to say yes to others and to be people pleasers. And nowadays, the way most of us live currently, we don't have to worry so much about that extreme survival. We're in a place in our evolution where most of us don't depend on the whole tribe to gather food and fend off wild animals, right?
Mhm.
So if we make a habit of automatically saying yes to others or overly trying to please others, then we end up doing that at the sacrifice of our own self-care and our own well-being in order to try to be liked and accepted. So we still have that desire to be liked and accepted and to have that connection, and we don't want to disappoint the people around us. But we've already laid out why it actually hurts our relationships rather than helping it if we don't set clear boundaries. And if you people pleasing, if you really look at it closely, that's when we tell people what they want to hear or what we think they want to hear, or we do what we think they want us to do because we want them to like us or love us more. And it really, again, goes back to wanting to avoid being rejected or being criticized. And some of us can really go out of our way of trying to avoid that at all costs, because we have such a strong need to want to be liked and want to be accepted. And this is not kindness. It's actually manipulation, if you think about it, because we're literally trying to manipulate the other person's thoughts and feelings about us based on what we say or do. And like we've already said, we cannot change other people's thoughts and feelings. We can only take responsibility for our own. And they're in charge of their own thoughts and feelings. We're in charge of ours. So instead of trying to manipulate others, even if it's not at all malicious, and I think most of the time it's not, we're not people pleasing because we're trying to maliciously manipulate the people around us. We're doing it because we fear abandonment or rejection.
Yeah.
And that doesn't usually get us the outcome that we're actually looking for, which is true connection, true intimacy, true love and respect. And so instead, if we can set those clear boundaries, we're really cultivating, genuine love. We're doing things out of genuine generosity rather than that sort of manipulation of that doing something good only because of how it'll make us feel or make us look. So, yeah.
Yeah. And, saying no can be really hard, right? It's something that we have to practice. It's something that we have to get good at. so we can say things, so we can say yes to the things that are really important to us, the things that really matter to us, the things that we want to do that
Yeah.
are most important. And, a lot of us are just afraid to say no. I mean, I've been in this situation many, countless, countless times, especially in like volunteering jobs. Like and there's been a few where I've gotten so like overwhelmed and kind of sucked into these positions of volunteering that it's become like a full-time job. And I've had to
Mm.
step back and say, no, I can't do this anymore, or I can only do these certain things. And so, we can't be afraid to say no to things that aren't nurturing us, that aren't serving our mental and physical health. And I know a lot of us, me at least, and I'm sure other people will agree, probably you, Daphne, as well. I think we've already talked about this a little bit, is that when we say no, we often think that we need to explain, right? We have to give a good reason so we're not hurting someone's feelings. But that can also be an effort to control what they think of us, right? This, like I said, has been kind of a big thing for me in the past, and not even making that connection that I'm trying to control what someone else is thinking of me. And especially kind of going back to those situations of volunteering. So it's important for us to remember, right? Number one, we can always say no,
Mm.
and we don't have to offer an explanation. We just really don't. This is not working for me right now, or I don't have time for this right now. No is a complete sentence, right? No is a complete sentence. And also, the second thing is, as adults, we get to behave as we want to.
Mm.
Each of us gets to make our own decisions about what's best for us, how we want to live our lives, um, and spend our time. And it's all about the intentions, right, that we set for ourselves. And like you were saying before, if it comes from a place of love, self-love, um, love and respect for the other person, um, then the intentions are going to come through.
Yeah. These are such important points. And I think that that would be such a great reminder to put on a sticky note in my bathroom on my mirror to remind me no is a complete sentence.
Yes.
And each of us gets to make our own decisions. Like those are such good points. So why don't we finish up today, Tonya, by sharing some of our favorite tips on how to
Yes.
set healthy boundaries, and especially as we, like you said, we're recording this during the holiday season. Thanksgiving's next week in the United States. And it's a good time to think about, yeah, healthy boundaries.
Yes. Yes. So, the first one that's really helped me, and I feel like especially as highly sensitive people, because we can get so overwhelmed so quickly by all of the things coming at us, especially this time of year, events, families, all the kind of extra stuff that comes with the holidays. So setting time limits on events ahead of time is really something that's helped me. So, for example, if you're going over to someone's home for an event, just let them know I'm planning to stay until 9 o'clock, at my friend's party, or saying it to yourself or your friend, and I'm going to let them know ahead of time. Look, I really want to come, but I can only stay until 9. And this is my plan. And a lot of times, we need to be prepared for pushback as well, right? Not everyone's going to understand our boundaries or why we need them in the first place. So pushback can be very common. But also we need to know that when people resist our boundaries, that it's confirmation that we need those boundaries, right? It's like they're just confirming to us that what we're doing is setting a healthy boundary for ourselves. Sometimes people might just ignore you or dismiss you, guilt you, right, into changing your mind. No, you have to stay until midnight, it's New Year's or whatever. Telling you maybe that you're unreasonable because you don't want to stay past 9 o'clock. And sometimes people will even stop inviting us, right, to things. And if someone's going to go that far, I feel like, remember, when you set boundaries, that if this is a person that can't respect why you've set these boundaries, that it might be time to, evaluate this person's place in your life. Unfortunately, this often goes for family as well, right? So it's helpful to be kind of extra prepared for these types of situations. But I feel like, especially during the holidays with so many, kind of like I said, extra things going on, that setting those time limits for yourself can really be helpful, because as HSPs, sometimes we just want to escape.
Yeah,
If
absolutely.
if I know I show up at 7, but I can escape at 9 and go home, then I'll go.
Yeah.
But having that kind of preset time limit has really, really helped me. How about you, Daphne?
Absolutely. And I don't think I've made it to midnight on a New Year's like almost ever in my adult life, and my kids will
It's
confirm
still going
that.
to be January 1st when you wake up in the morning.
Exactly. And yeah, so I might not get invited to the party because I'm going to be scooting out way before the party usually gets started. So, but another thing that I found to be really helpful is that if someone makes a request and asks me to do something, I've found it to be so beneficial to start by noticing what's my gut reaction. Do I feel excitement or do I feel dread? And I really don't like to be put on the spot. Like, it makes me so uncomfortable if someone asks something of me or wants me to make a decision on something, like right there on the spot, because I often find that wanting to be a people pleaser, that I will then regret my decision if I go ahead and make it on the fly. So one thing that I've learned for myself is, if you need to, buy yourself some time so you can truly determine what the best thing for you to do is. So if someone asks, has a request, or like, hey, come to my party, or hey, will you volunteer for this or do this, or whatever, maybe you can respond with, can I get back to you tomorrow or later or next week, whatever that needs to be. And then take the time to really check in with yourself. Again, like, notice, feel into your body. Like, what's your gut reaction? What is your gut telling you? Do you get a sense of dread with it? Or is it like, oh, this is kind of exciting, I might like to do that? Check your calendar. Look at what you've already committed to and see, does this actually work for me right now? And is it something that I want to do? Do I have the time? Do I have the energy? Do I have the desire to do this right now? And then, like we talked about earlier, then we have to be willing to have those uncomfortable conversations sometimes, right? Speak your truth. And I think we get better at this with practice, and again, we can kind of check in and ask ourselves, how can I do this from a place of love? And it's not just love for the person making the request, but love for yourself. How can I be kind to myself so that I have a better relationship with everybody involved? And some of us have a really hard time with this. Some of us, will
Some of us do.
some of us will go to great extents to be a people pleaser, but this is really about being honest. It's about being authentic and living with real integrity, which I think is something that, if we think about it, it's something we would all strive for. We want to have honest, authentic relationships, and we want to live with really good integrity.
And I think it gets maybe a little bit easier too as you get older, you have more life experience. But what it, a lot of times what it really comes down to is, it's maybe a little bit kind of cliche to say, but life is too short.
Yeah.
Right? Life is too short. Our time is so limited on this planet, in these bodies, that we really need to be intentional and careful about how we spend our time and energy. And another way for me is knowing when to walk away from conversations and people that are triggering conversations, and people that are unhealthy for us, right? We're allowed to excuse ourselves. We're allowed to walk away. Sometimes we feel guilty, obligated to stay and listen, especially probably if it's family. So we feel obligated, right, to stay, to listen, to engage in these, kind of triggering situations. Or we feel we need to once again, give a reason or an excuse for walking away. But honestly, we don't need to give any reasons to walk away from a person or a situation that makes us feel unsafe or unwelcome. If you're really in a situation, I always like to go, well, agree to disagree, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's you don't want to go round and round circles with people. Once again, time, energy, physical, mental, spiritual health. The more we can put those things at the forefront of everything that we do in our lives, it's going to be easier to set those boundaries and to walk away from those types of situations.
Absolutely. I've used that, agree to disagree so much, especially like with some of my own family, and just kind of another example is of that sort of thing, of being able to cut off like conversations and stuff. I remember that when I was pregnant, that I found that a lot of people wanted to just like automatically tell me birthing horror stories.
Oh, no.
And as a highly sensitive person, it was already, my imagination is vivid enough that I didn't need like extra fuel to add to that fire. So as soon as someone would start to tell me a story, I would stop it, in a kind way, but I would ask them, hey, is this a really positive story? And I would politely ask them like not to tell me bad ones, because pregnancy was already stressful enough and I already had a vivid enough imagination, and I didn't need, to add to that. So, there are certain times in our lives where, like I said, like our boundaries aren't always the same, and we have to be a little bit more proactive and really be thinking about being willing to say like, I don't want to have this conversation right now, or I don't want to hear this because it's going to be triggering for me. And another boundary that's been a really big one for me throughout my adult life has revolved around my diet, my digestion, what I can and can't eat, because there are things that really don't work for me, and things where, like being a vegetarian for a very long time, and, things like that, where if you have a certain diet, or if you have, health issues or sensitive digestion, and food is a big one for us, because so many social situations and so many holidays revolve around food, and that can be really stressful for people. And it can be a place where we have to be really clear about our boundaries, because people will be like, here, just cheat just this once, not knowing that if you do, that you're going to suffer greatly and maybe even be sick afterwards. So here's my tips. Here's some of the things that I've done, is that if I'm going to an event that revolves around food, I will eat a really nourishing meal before I leave, before I go to social gatherings. And if it's a potluck, I'll take something with me that I know is going to be enough, even if that's one of the only things that I can eat, so that I'll have just enough to hold me over. Because it's not, in many cases, it's not realistic to expect others to be able to take care of our own specific needs, right? Maybe they don't have any experience with that and they wouldn't know how to approach it. And then it would be something stressful if we say, oh, great, but I can't this, and this. And again, it depends on the situation and the people that we're dealing with, but we want to be responsible for our own personal health, our own well-being, because that will help us to feel better physically, emotionally, mentally, if we are making our own self-care a priority. And so this is something I always try to do if I'm heading out. And even, even if I'm going to a restaurant with someone and it's a restaurant I've never been to before, I'll be proactive and I'll look up the menu online before I even go. And I will have a plan so I know if there's something I can eat or not eat. And how much do I need to eat before I even head out? So it's a great one to consider, especially as we head into the holidays or as we're in the middle of the holidays. Yeah.
I'm so glad that you brought this up, because this is definitely something I have dealt with for decades, really. I mean, I've been vegetarian since I was a teenager, and now vegan. And so I deal with this one all the time, not just the holidays. And I do all of those things. I look up the menus. I eat before I go over to someone's home, even if they, know about my diet and all of that, and they support it. It's still better, like you said, to take responsibility, right? Take responsibility for our own health and well-being. And it can be hard. I have friends that, we used to go out all the time, and now they just don't invite me anymore. They don't invite me to go out and eat with them, even though I would still go and I could have a salad or whatever. It's like, it's a thing for them. So,
Yeah.
but it's my boundary,
Yep.
right? And then speaking of the holidays, this one is another huge one. Do not feel obligated or guilted into buying things for people. Do not.
Yes.
This is a hard one. This one is so hard in our materialistic society, right? There's so much pressure on us to buy things.
Yeah.
And it's one I've really struggled with. I've been in those situations. I feel uncomfortable about gift giving, and it's, except for with my partner, it's almost always out of obligation. And unless it's something like going to lunch, or some sort of activity, going to a museum, something like that, with someone. Otherwise, things that we buy people usually just gather dust, or the gift is quickly forgotten. I'm sure parents probably struggle with this one even more than I can probably wrap my mind around. But with friends and family, just being realistic about our expectations and about the capabilities and limits of others to kind of understand when it comes to all of these things that we're talking about. But gift giving is really, something to set boundaries around, because finances are important.
Yes, that was the thing that came to my mind. As right now, I mean, so many people are struggling just to make ends meet, and and that puts a lot of pressure on people. And it's, and we have to think about those boundaries, because if we do it anyway, because we feel guilted into it, or we feel really pressured, and then we might suffer for months, trying to dig ourselves out of debt because we did something that really, in the end, wasn't worth it. And if it means, if it's really important, then make someone something, or do something for them, or there are other ways versus just mass consumerism of things that maybe aren't good for the environment and aren't good for us, and that, like you said, just gather dust. And
this happens a lot at jobs too.
oh,
My
the
last,
white, like the white elephant.
worst.
The white elephant, like every time if there's an option to do Secret Santa or something, I never sign up. And it's like, I like it when they give you the option to either opt in or opt
A
out.
lot of places don't.
Yeah, and a lot of places don't, and it's super uncomfortable. I've been lucky because I've been at a place where you can choose, and it's nice because if you don't, nobody's going to get you anything, and you don't have to randomly buy stuff for people that yeah, that's a big one. It's stressful this time of the year.
It is. Just, I'll tell you quickly, my last office job that I had, we had a thing where we would just have to buy like 5 or 6 gifts.
Mm-hmm.
And then we would play this game where you roll dice and then you steal like presents from other people. I don't even know what it's called. There was screaming, there was yelling. It was the worst experience of my life. All 5 times I had to do it, I would get so stressed about it that I finally told my boss, like the last couple of years, I would say, I need to take a break after this event. And I would actually leave. Say,
Yeah.
even though you're serving us food and all this other kind of stuff, I said, I need to leave for an hour and like decompress from this chaos.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, at work, that's a huge thing that, we can really kind of try to find ways to navigate, that's going to, speak to your manager, speak to someone, and just, let them know, set that
Like,
boundary.
if you're lucky enough to have some PTO, maybe that's you plan ahead. You use that half day of PTO for that, because that sounds like an HSP nightmare to
Yes.
me.
Oh, it was. It
Yeah.
was. I can
Yeah.
help you.
Yeah.
So
Ah,
I feel like, one of the things that, one of the healthiest things that I really learned is that, to meet people where they are, right, is that we can't necessarily always have really high expectations of others if we don't communicate to them what our needs are. And, a lot of people, also understanding that a lot of people don't have the capability to really understand our trait, right, as highly sensitive people. If they're not HSP, they're never really going to understand. And that's okay, right? It's okay if people don't understand. But we need to communicate and set those boundaries. And in a lot of ways, demand that they respect them. And however that looks, to each of us, it's going to look different for all of us. And it takes time and it takes effort and it takes a lot of recalibrating situations. And it takes a lot of adjustment on the end of other people as well. And it's something that, like we've been talking about, something that not some people aren't willing to take on for us to have those kind of relationships with us. And we need to learn to be able to be okay with that, that some people are meant to be in our lives and some people aren't. And at least for me, and maybe Daphne, you feel the same way, is that I feel like not everybody needs to understand me. I'm way past that, right? You don't have to understand me. I have my quirks. I'm, got all kinds of things about me that are special. And it's okay. You don't have to understand my sensitivity or any of those things, but you need to respect me and you need to respect my perspective, where I'm coming from, And I'm willing to do the same for them as well, to the best of my ability. And that's all we can really expect from other people too, by meeting them where they are and just knowing that they're doing their best to respect where we're coming from. And, if we can meet in that place with people and in these relationships, then I feel like if the relationship is meant to be, then it's going to be long lasting. And if it doesn't work out, then I have to be okay with that too. And it really comes down to another cliche, quality over quantity.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely. So I think, friends, all of you people out there listening, when setting boundaries as highly sensitive people, like really, it's our goal to find healthy, flexible boundaries that are right for us at this time in our life. It's okay for our boundaries to change over time. It's okay to recognize that, yeah, at times we're better off without some people in our lives, or that we need to change situations, and that it is up to us to follow through on communicating our boundaries clearly, communicating what the consequences will be if people choose not to honor them, and that's their right as well. And sometimes we can be okay with that, with certain boundaries, but we have to be able to choose how we're then going to navigate that relationship. Right? So there's no set rules. Every relationship, every situation is unique. What feels okay for us might feel totally different for someone else, and that's okay. So, for those of you listening today, if you are interested in continuing to explore these kinds of things deeper, you're welcome to join me in my Highly Sensitive and Strong Facebook community. We'll drop the link down in the show notes. And Tonya, what do you have going on during the holiday season?
Well, I've just created a new meditation offering for the holiday season, actually, but I mean, you can use it anytime. But grounding and balance for highly sensitive people, and a calming sensitive nervous systems. These are two meditations that can really help to reduce some of our holiday stress as HSPs. And these are yoga nidra practices. So if you've ever found meditation frustrating in the past, or if you've never even tried to meditate, yoga nidra is one of my favorite practices, because all you need to do is lay down and listen.
Sounds perfect.
And that's it. And it's such a calming, nurturing practice. And it's so amazing for highly sensitive nervous systems. And I'll put a link for that in the show notes as well.
Well, I will say, I'll jump in and say, I absolutely love the practice of yoga nidra. It's that deep guided relaxation. And I always find all of your guided meditations particularly lovely. I love your voice. I love putting on my headphones and letting you talk me through deep relaxation or a guided meditation. So it's such a great thing. And I hope people will check it out, because we all can use a little bit of that. I'm going to go escape for a few minutes and
Oh,
deep
yes.
relax. Sometimes I think that that's even better than a massage, because you don't have to go anywhere or
Yep. Just
anything
lay
like
down, let
that.
the living room.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you so much for saying that, Daphne. That means a lot to me, especially coming from another yoga teacher. So that's very kind. I appreciate that deeply.
Yeah, so you'll be putting the link down in the show notes
Yes,
for
I'll have a
your
link
meditation.
for my meditations, and also for Daphne's Highly Sensitive and Strong community, which is an awesome community. And you lead meditations, right? Every
I
Monday?
do every Monday. Yep. So and then those stay in the guide section of the group, and I do live trainings in the group, and it's a wonderful little community. So come join us.
Yes, so lots of great things for us as HSPs to get us through the holidays.
That's right.
Well, Daphne and I want to thank you so much for listening. We are, as always, so incredibly grateful that you've chosen to spend your valuable time with us. Um, if you're enjoying the podcast, please share it with a friend who you think might find value in it. You can leave a review for us wherever you listen. You can like this and subscribe on YouTube if you're joining us on YouTube. And it's just really helpful for us to reach as many HSPs as possible with all of these really important topics that we're talking about. So if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, always feel free to reach out to us. We're here, and we want to explore all of these things with you, all of this lifelong journey, right, of being a highly sensitive person. It's a lot easier when we have support. So take care of yourselves, enjoy the holidays, and we will see you next time. Bye,
Happy
everybody.
holidays. Bye.
Bye.